For the better part of 2 years now, the world has been fixed upon the genocide in Gaza. And of course this is natural, many other events, conflicts have been, if not ignored, have certainly been sidelined, or at least aren't given the kind of priority that they deserve. Of course, now that the guns are silent in Gaza, and we hope that this continues, attention is slowly being turned towards Sudan, and that, of course, has been underscored by recent events. Last week, the RSF, the Rapid Support Force, which has been locked in this bitter civil war with the Sudanese government, finally took the Fasher, the town of Fasher, after an 18-month siege. What followed can only best be described as a massacre, in which almost 2,000 people have been killed and 60,000 have been displaced. Of course, this was broadcast to the world in footage that has been released by survivors who were able to, of course, take whatever they could while they were fleeing, as well as, I think, by the RSF itself, or at least soldiers who participated or were responsible for the massacres on that day. The events of that day were so bloody that apparently they could even be seen from space. Overnight, it seems, piles of bodies were piled high. There was blood in the streets. And this conflict that has been raging for almost 2 to 3 years now demands that certain questions be asked, and in particular, the one that we are here today to discuss, or at least ask ourselves, is what role, what hand does the United Arab Emirates have to play in all of this? I bring this up because in reading about this Sudanese civil war and the rise of the RSF, of course, the RSF, the rebranded Janjaweeds, who of course were themselves accused of ethnic cleansing and genocide in the Darfur region, were rebranded, of course, as the RSF, and then under Omar al-Bashir, and then through many permutations later, and with, of course, official sanction, they rose in prominence, only to eventually be at loggerheads with the Sudanese government, who wanted them to sort of be assimilated into the regular army. Of course, this is information that you can easily glean off the internet, but the question again that I wish to raise is, what role does the United Arab Emirates have in all of this? And of course, why does it have a role at all? The question is one that at first would perhaps stump you. Why would the UAE be meddling in the affairs of Sudan? One can understand, at least from their perspective, why they would, for example, be turning a blind eye to Israel's atrocities. Why, among all other Arab nations who themselves are guilty of allowing this genocide, why, for example, Israel would, during the past 2 years, increase trade and cooperation with Israel, while, of course, it was enacting ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza. Why, for example, it would allow for Israeli soldiers tired of the killing to recuperate in Dubai for a weekend. These aren't tall claims, these aren't tall tales at all. One can do a quick Google search to see how Israel became a sort of, how the UAE, Dubai in particular, became a haven, so to speak, for Israeli soldiers over the past 2 years. That, of course, can be answered simply by self-preservation, by self-interest. The UAE, unlike, for example, Saudi Arabia, isn't as resource blessed. It does not have oil literally flowing as rivers beneath it. Right up till, I would say, the 90s, it was not a country that had yet to rebrand itself, but completely revolutionize, completely change who and what it was. It went from an emirate that largely subsisted on oil and oil and whatever trade and fishing and sort of minor industries like that, into this sort of real estate, service-oriented powerhouse that has become the destination in the Middle East, and of course a role model for many other countries. Qatar following suit, and now of course Saudi Arabia. I think a very long time ago, perhaps when the sheikhs, when the Emiratis decided to chart a course for themselves, it was a very clear decision that henceforth all decisions made for this country were going to be made not with this notion of perhaps maybe Muslim brotherhood, pan-Arabism, nothing like that. It was going to be simply made on the grounds of self-interest. It was going to be made with UAE first. Of course, no one can begrudge them that all countries are now thinking of themselves first and any other ties, be they religious, ethnic, political, later. So that's what could explain the Arab Zionists among us, their sort of favorable overtures and, of course, actions towards Israel. But what does it have to do in Sudan? What does it have to do in Africa? To explain this, I would suggest that all of you watch a documentary from 2022. This is called The Grab. It was, the filmmakers made it in collaboration with journalists from the Center for Investigative Reporting. And The Grab is a documentary about how governments and private institutions in these times of climate change and scarcity are scrambling to resource grab, are scrambling to stock up, invest, grab as many natural resources as possible. Of course, the usual suspects are all there. The United States, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia. But then, of course, we get the UAE. There are many instances and examples in this movie, in this documentary, of what these countries are doing. There is, of course, that famous example of Saudi Arabia buying up arid land in Arizona. I think it's almost about 15 acres or something like that. And they are producing hay, which is then being, shipped back to Saudi itself to feed, it's being used as fodder for the various animals. Russia is hiring US cowboys for land that it expects over the next 50 years to climate change, which is now, of course, frozen wasteland. I think it's tundra, but in 50 years, as the earth warms up, unfortunately, it'll be open to agriculture. So they expect to be using it as grazing land for livestock. And then, of course, we come to the UAE. The documentarians in this movie are able to unearth this particular story of how in Africa, in Zambia and in other countries, Blackwater, of course, the very famous Blackwater, is being used. Mercenaries are being used to secure farmland, agricultural land. And these mercenaries are there. And of course, being Blackwater, I mean, it represents it is a private institution, but of course, as they always say, follow the money. So they do indeed follow the money. And what is revealed is that, among others, China is included there, but among others, the UAE is backing Blackwater to secure these lands which it has bought, because it is bought thanks to working with corrupt governments who are more than happy to take the money and displace, of course, the local farmers and the people themselves and natives. They are forced off, in come in the mercenaries, and then it becomes, of course, privately owned land. This strategy, if you will, this outlook, has been attributed to National Security Advisor Sheikh Tanoon. It is a notion that the UAE, being the UAE, because it is practically desert, they must have, at all costs, food security. In order to have this food security, which of course they cannot have within their own, I mean, sort of within the Middle East, I can't quote any figures on that, but even if you open up the maps, even if you look at them, you'll see that most of it is not arable. Most of it cannot be used for agriculture. So for a country that is largely dependent on outside sources for such basic things as food, the UAE now by design is pushing ahead with this policy of securing agricultural land in Africa by any means necessary. And that is what explains what is going on in Sudan, or at least to an extent what it explains. The RSF, as is widely known, is being funded and armed by the UAE. According to sources, it is now the UAE is in possession of almost 50,000 acres of land in Sudan, which of course it intends to use for agriculture. The RSF are the ones who, of course, are by proxy maintaining this land for them. I know this sounds like a wild conspiracy. I mean, the kind of stuff that you would find on some obscure page like our own on YouTube somewhere. It sounds so out there. It sounds, I'm not going to say bizarre, because I mean, in this world that we live in today, we've come to accept that at least self-interest can drive individuals, nations to extremes. And we've been seeing this before. I mean, let's not say that other countries, that sort of, the UAE is unique in what it is doing. I mean, sort of America's been doing that in the Middle East for the better part of a century. I mean, now, of course, we've seen China definitely not, funding civil war, but they've definitely made inroads into Africa, and they are now predominant. They now have almost a monopoly on rare earths, which of course rankles Trump. The UAE's actions have yet to be condemned. We do see now, and I can only put this down as chatter, disparate as it is, because the thing is, it has yet to reach this crescendo. We have yet to see the international community condemn the actions of the RSF as they have, for example, done Hamas. Because at the end of the day, this is just, let's be very honest, to the West, this is just Africans killing Africans, Muslims killing Muslims. Who cares? It barely registers. And if perhaps in their reckoning, if the UAE is funding this, well, I mean, sort of like, what has this got to do with them? This isn't something that poses an existential threat to the West. But for all of the rest of us who who have a conscience, who feel that what is going on is wrong, it is now time that more is said and done, that the UAE is called out for what it is doing in Sudan. This is, of course, a question of agricultural land. What about gold? That's another thing that, vampire-like, the UAE, thanks to the conflict that it itself is funding, or at least taking advantage of in Africa. Dubai boasts the largest gold market in the world. Where do you think all that gold is coming from? From Africa, from the DRC, from Sudan, from so many other places in Africa, that thanks to complicit governments, thanks to governments that are corrupt, who are more than happy to take money and not care a fig for what goes on with the local populace. All of the gold is being smuggled. I was going to say funneled and smuggled, and it became fuggled. Sorry, maybe that's a new word. Is being funneled to Dubai. The gold markets are essentially, I mean, once upon a time, a lot of hue and cry was being made for, blood diamonds, how the West was profiting off of the conflicts in Africa to secure these diamonds. Well, Dubai is doing the same. The UAE is doing the same with all of that gold. We are now increasingly, I don't think this is a point of sort of increasingly, we are now very firmly living in a world where self-interest dictates foreign policy. And it is literally every nation for itself. While the government of Pakistan's stance regarding, or at least outwardly, towards the United Arab Emirates is one of almost subservience. I mean, we've always got our begging bowl out towards them. I still think that this is something that our people have yet to realize. We're always looking at Dubai as the pie in the sky, as this means to get out of Pakistan and sort of like, immigrate if possible. Well, of course, Arabs don't allow that, but somehow relocate to Dubai. But I mean, when the country itself, and this isn't just for Pakistanis, this is for people all over the world who wish to work there. When the country itself is funded, is fueled, is run on blood money, then of course comes the question, is it worth it?
The revolution will be live.